Julian Ashford did not take public transportation. The very idea was absurd to him. As the chief executive officer of Ashford Group, his world was entirely insulated. He moved between climate-controlled penthouses, tinted windows on luxury town cars, and private elevators. But today the city had turned against him. A massive traffic gridlock paralyzed the financial district, and Julian was precisely 4 blocks away from a board meeting that would determine the future of his empire. The board of directors had grown tired of his cold, calculated public image. They wanted a leader who resonated with the people, a man with a human side, before they handed him the keys to a massive international merger. Desperate to salvage the deal, Julian abandoned his car and descended into the damp, echoing chaos of the subway station. The noise was deafening, the rush of bodies overwhelming. He pushed his way through the turnstiles, his tailored Italian suit a beacon of misplaced wealth in the underground grime. He was checking his luxury watch, mentally preparing his excuses, when a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It was a voice, hauntingly pure, cutting through the screech of metal and the murmur of 1,000 tired commuters. It held a profound sorrow, yet soared with an unbreakable strength. Julian forgot the time. He forgot the board meeting. He moved toward the sound as if pulled by an invisible thread. He found her at the end of the platform. Sienna Hayes was singing with her eyes closed, her fingers strumming a battered acoustic guitar. She wore a heavy, faded coat that drowned her frame, her dark hair falling in loose, unruly waves. At her feet, an open guitar case held a meager scattering of coins and crushed dollar bills. Julian stood perfectly still, watching her. He had bought out entire companies without a second thought, but something about this woman commanded his complete attention. When the song ended, the small crowd dispersed, dropping their spare change. Julian stepped forward. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it into the worn velvet lining of her case. Sienna opened her eyes. She did not gasp or smile with gratitude. She looked at the bill, then slowly trailed her gaze up his expensive shoes, past his perfectly pressed trousers, to meet his eyes. Her gaze was sharp, carrying an intensity that made Julian shift his weight. She reached into the case, picked up the $100 bill and held it out to him. She told him that she was a musician, not a charity case, and if he did not have time to listen to the next song, he could take his guilt money somewhere else. Julian was stunned. Nobody spoke to him like that. The defiance in her voice sparked a sudden, dangerous idea in his mind. The board wanted a man of the people. They wanted a story. What better story than a ruthless billionaire who falls in love with a struggling artist he met on a subway platform? It was the perfect public relations miracle. He did not take the money back. Instead, he made her an offer right there on the platform. He told her he needed a fiancé for 6 months. An arrangement, strictly business. In exchange, he would pay her enough to buy the subway station, let alone never sing in it again. He promised to fund her music career and give her a life she had only dreamed of. Sienna looked at him as if he had lost his mind. She laughed, a dry, bitter sound that echoed against the tiled walls. She told him that his money could buy a lot of things, but it could not buy a soul, and it certainly could not buy hers. She packed her guitar, her movements precise and unbothered by his immense wealth. But Julian was relentless. He handed her his embossed business card, telling her that pride was a luxury she clearly could not afford, and walked away before she could reject him again. 2 days later, the harsh reality of an eviction notice forced Sienna to walk into the towering glass lobby of Ashford Group. When she entered Julian's sprawling corner office, she did not look intimidated by the sweeping views of the city or the oppressive silence of extreme wealth. She sat across from him, her posture perfectly straight. Julian slid the contract across the polished mahogany desk. It outlined everything: public appearances, acceptable behavior, a strict non-disclosure agreement, and a final payout that would secure her future forever. Sienna picked up the heavy gold pen he offered, but she did not sign immediately. She laid out her own terms. She would not be molded into a silent, obedient doll. She would choose her own clothes. She would not quit her music, and she would never, under any circumstances, lie about where she came from. Julian agreed, amused by her fiery independence, thinking he could easily control her once she was living in his world. As she finally signed the document, Julian noticed the way she held the pen. It was a subtle, elegant grip, the kind taught in exclusive prep schools, not learned on the harsh streets of the city. He brushed the thought away, attributing it to a coincidence. The transition was jarring. Sienna moved into Julian's massive penthouse, a sterile monument to his success. But she refused to let the coldness of the place sink into her. She brought her guitar, her worn books, and a stubborn warmth that began to disrupt Julian's perfectly ordered life. The first real test came at the annual Ashford Charity Gala. Julian's stylist had prepared a blindingly expensive diamond necklace and a restrictive designer gown. Sienna rejected both. Instead, she arrived in the grand ballroom wearing a simple, elegant midnight blue dress she had sourced herself, her neck bare, her beauty entirely unadorned and breathtaking. When the cameras flashed, Julian instinctively placed a heavy, controlling hand on the small of her back, expecting her to shrink into his side for protection. Instead, Sienna stood tall, her chin raised, facing the blinding lights, with a calm, almost practiced grace that sent a ripple of surprise through Julian. She belonged in the spotlight. Across the room, Marcus Devereaux watched them. Marcus was Julian's fiercest corporate rival, a man who built his fortune on sabotage and deceit. He hated Julian with a burning passion. Marcus approached the couple, a venomous smile playing on his lips. He intended to humiliate the poor subway singer Julian had paraded into high society. He offered Sienna his hand, his voice dripping with condescension, as he asked how a girl from the streets was enjoying the taste of real champagne. Sienna did not flinch. She took a slow sip from her crystal glass, met Marcus's predatory gaze, and delivered a quiet, cutting remark. She smiled softly and told Marcus that the champagne was excellent, certainly of a higher vintage than the unstable junk bonds he had been using to artificially inflate his recent real estate acquisitions in the Harbour District. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's smile vanished, his face draining of colour. Julian stared at his fake fiancée in absolute shock. Corporate espionage and high-level financial vulnerabilities were not things a struggling street musician should know about. Marcus excused himself, his composure completely shattered. Julian immediately pulled Sienna into a secluded corridor, away from the prying eyes of the elite. He cornered her, demanding to know exactly how she knew about Marcus Devereaux's failing investments. Sienna looked up at him, her expression guarded but defiant. She simply stated that when you spend your life invisible on the streets, you hear things that rich men say when they think no one important is listening. It was a perfect lie, but as Julian looked into her fierce, intelligent eyes, the forced proximity between them shifted. The air grew thick with a sudden, undeniable tension. He realized he had brought a profound mystery into his life. The contract was signed. The game was in motion. But for the first time in his life, Julian Ashford had absolutely no idea what he was dealing with. The weeks that followed the gala were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian Ashford was a man accustomed to absolute control, yet within the walls of his own penthouse, he found himself constantly off balance. He attempted to smother Sienna in the comforts of his wealth, having designer wardrobes delivered and leaving the keys to a luxury sports car on the kitchen island. Sienna completely ignored them. She continued to wear her vintage coats and took the subway, slipping past his security detail to play her guitar in the park. One evening, after a grueling 14-hour negotiation that left Julian visibly exhausted, he walked into the dark kitchen to find her waiting. She did not offer a grand gesture. She simply pushed a steaming mug of dark roast coffee across the marble counter, brewed exactly the way he liked it, and told him that even titans needed to rest. In the quiet darkness, illuminated only by the city lights, the space between them vanished. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers, and for a fleeting moment the cold, calculated billionaire realized he was terrifyingly close to falling in love with his own employee. But the illusion of their fragile peace shattered with a single manila envelope. Julian arrived at his office the next morning to find a confidential dossier sitting squarely on his desk, courtesy of a private investigator he had hired weeks ago and completely forgotten to cancel. He opened the file, his eyes scanning the documents. The woman sleeping in his guest room was not just a struggling street musician. She was Sienna Carrington, the sole heir to the Carrington global shipping empire, a fortune that rivaled his own. She had vanished 3 years ago. Walking away from billions after discovering her family's wealth was built on the ruthless destruction of local communities. When Julian returned to the penthouse that night, the air was freezing. He threw the dossier onto the glass table, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he demanded the truth. He felt entirely foolish, a man who thought he had rescued a desperate girl, only to discover he was sharing a roof with royalty in hiding. Sienna did not cower. She looked at the papers, her shoulders squaring. She told him with fierce pride that she had abandoned that name because she refused to let money poison her soul, pointing out that she had built a life on her own terms, a concept he could not possibly understand. The confrontation was explosive, stripping away the careful, polite distance they had maintained. She accused his world of being hollow, and he accused her of playing a cruel game. The argument left a devastating fracture between them. For days they moved through the penthouse like ghosts. The silence was agonizing. Yet Julian found himself unable to stay angry. The realization that she had chosen poverty over a corrupt fortune only made his admiration for her deepen. He stopped trying to impress her with his bank accounts. Instead, one rainy morning, Sienna woke up to find her battered acoustic guitar resting on the sofa, its broken tuning peg carefully repaired by hand. There was no note, just the quiet, undeniable proof that Julian was finally learning to pay attention. Before they could bridge the gap, the past violently caught up with them. Marcus Devereaux had not forgotten the humiliation at the gala. Consumed by vindictive rage, Marcus had dug into Julian's sudden engagement. During an exclusive charity auction, Marcus cornered them in a private viewing gallery. His smile was victorious as he held up a sleek digital tablet, displaying a drafted press release. He had uncovered both the fake marriage contract and Sienna's true identity. Marcus sneered, promising to send the story to every major news outlet in the city. He gloated that the scandal would not only torpedo Julian's crucial upcoming merger, but would also drag Sienna back into the toxic, high-profile world she had sacrificed everything to escape, completely destroying the quiet life she had fought so hard to build. Marcus Devereaux stood with a triumphant smirk, convinced he held the ultimate weapon to destroy them both. He waited for Julian to beg, to offer millions in exchange for his silence. But Julian did not reach for his checkbook. Instead, he looked at Sienna. He saw the flash of panic in her eyes, the terror of being dragged back into the toxic world she had fled. In that defining moment, Julian made a choice that violated every rule of corporate survival he had ever learned. He stepped between Sienna and Marcus, his voice dangerously calm. He told Marcus to go ahead and publish it. He declared that he did not care about the merger, the board of directors, or the public fallout, because absolutely none of it mattered more than protecting the woman standing behind him. Marcus faltered, his arrogant facade cracking as he realized his blackmail was useless. But Sienna refused to let Julian sacrifice his life's work for her. She stepped out from behind him, her head held high. She looked Marcus dead in the eye and told him he was too late. Taking Julian by the hand, she walked straight out of the private gallery and onto the main stage of the charity auction. The room fell silent as the billionaire and his mysterious fiancée approached the microphone. Sienna did not wait for the press to twist her story. She took a deep breath and spoke directly to the room full of elite investors, reporters, and rivals. She introduced herself as Sienna Carrington. She laid bare the truth of her past, the toxic legacy of her family, and the beautiful, honest life she had built on the streets. Then, with a voice as clear and commanding as her singing, she exposed Marcus Devereaux. She revealed his desperate blackmail attempt in the gallery, detailing his fraudulent real estate investments and his pathetic attempt to leverage her trauma for corporate gain. The backlash was instantaneous. Murmurs of shock swept through the ballroom. Marcus, who had followed them out to stop her, froze in the center of the room as every camera flashed in his direction. His investors, several of whom were seated at the front tables, immediately began making furious phone calls. Within minutes, the financial ruin Marcus had tried to inflict on Julian rebounded entirely onto himself. He was escorted out of the gala by security, his reputation completely destroyed, and his company plunging into freefall, abandoned by everyone he had tried to manipulate. Later that night, The adrenaline faded, leaving a quiet stillness in the penthouse. Julian found Sienna standing on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. He walked up beside her, the cool night air wrapping around them. There were no contracts left between them, no deals, and no secrets. Julian turned to her, stripping away the last remnants of his formidable armor. He told her that he had spent his entire life accumulating power because he thought it was the only way to be safe, but meeting her had shown him how truly empty his world was. He did not ask her to stay in his gilded cage. Instead, he promised to help her build whatever world she wanted, even if it meant leaving his own behind. He asked for her forgiveness, and more importantly, he asked for a real chance to earn her heart. Sienna looked up into his eyes, seeing not the ruthless executive, but a man who had finally learned how to love. She smiled, a genuine radiant expression, and reached out to take his hand, telling him that she would like that very much. A year later, the harsh noise of the city subway was a distant memory. The heavy wooden doors of an independent music academy stood open to the warm coastal breeze. Sienna sat on a small wooden stage, her guitar resting on her knee as she taught a group of underprivileged children how to find their voices. Julian leaned against the doorway, watching her with quiet pride. He still ran Ashford Group, but he did it from a distance, having traded corner offices for a life that actually meant something. He walked over as the children filed out, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. They had built a new empire, not of wealth, but of purpose and genuine love. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. We will see you next time.